MOT 135, Chapter 11, the Lymphatic System, Part 3. So we left off page 443, Forms of Acquired Immunity. I've sort of summarized it here a little bit visually better than the book, but please read the book. So there's passive and there's active. Passive, you usually don't have to do anything. You just have to passively sit there. It's naturally occurring, and usually there's no disease process itself. Natural passive could be from someone else, such as the antibodies passing from mother to baby when you're nursing, or through the womb during the placenta. Some antibodies can pass through to the baby while the baby is still in the womb. There's artificial passive, which again can be the injection of serum or synthetic antibodies from another source. So we can get those from animals or bacteria themselves. And we inject the antibodies to make that reaction happen, but it's artificial source. We haven't come into contact with that pathogen. We've been given the pathogen deliberately. Usually used for animal reactions or diseases, such as rabies, in emergent situations. Snake anti-venom, for example, for snake bites or scorpion stings, comes from the animal themselves. Then we have active acquired immunity. We've acquired our immunity through active means, which means we actually get sick. And sometimes we are given this artificially to get sick. So actively, we can have natural active. We can get pathogen a normal way by coming into contact with them, with a sick person, by handling the doorknobs, by touching something, by breathing something in, etc. The normal way that we get a pathogen. That's the natural part. Cellular and humoral antibodies are created, like we described before. The B cells replicate, or the T cells replicate, to give us our immunity. And then if we get sick again, the antibodies remember that disease. Or we can get it artificially. We can be given weakened forms of those antigens to promote the immune response. So it's not enough to make us sick, but it is enough to give our cells that little marker, that little billboard, that poster to say that it's a foreign antigen, and we are to react like we normally do to that and create our own immunity to it. So artificial is things like the measles, mumps, rubella vaccines that we have. They are usually weakened states of the antigen, certainly not aggressive enough to get into our cells. So T helpers, a little more detail. Again, it does go into this. Read that part too, but basically T helpers we've talked about. The T helper cells are the ones that wander around the system and recognize the foreigners. The figure 11.20 gives a graphic of how the T cells work. They can activate macrophages for inflammation and fever, for the non-specific immunity, but they also help with both humoral and cellular immunity, the ones that we've described before. Remember, the humoral, the T helper cells go around the body and they recognize the foreign antigens on the B cells, and it releases interleukin 2 so that the B cells make their reaction, and then they do their cloning and their making of the antibodies. And in cellular response, the T cells recognize the foreign posters on any cell and release interleukin 1 so that the T cytotoxic cells can react and attack. So basically the T helpers are the ones that make the reactions to the B cells or the T cytotoxics in order to give us our immunity. If we didn't have those wandering around recognizing anything, then the diseases would take hold. Read the section about functions of the lymphatic system and aging. The functions are basically summarized here: fluid balance, lipid absorption, defense against disease, and immunity, which we've talked about. And then the aging, basically our ability does not change. And the B cell population stays stable. But what happens is, because our thymus has declined over the years, we don't need it so much anymore. The new T cells decline slightly. The thymus has almost disappeared. So basically our ability to create new immune responses is diminished. So we have a decrease in T helper cells, and we already know how important they are, and that slows down the reaction and recognition to any disease, which is why sometimes a disease can really take hold in the time it takes our T helper cells to create that reaction. So because we've got that slowed down reaction, we can get slightly more diseases, and specifically cancers and viruses. So that's why usually in children, that's when it is most prevalent to have the immune shots given to us when we're children, because we react better to it and create more antibodies to those killer diseases. And as we get older, we have annual shots because we can't really keep up with the T cell production for immunity. So we have to have things like pneumonia shots, maybe even booster shots for some of the things that we had as a kid, because our reaction has been slowed down. Diagnostic tests and disorders. The diagnostic tests I won't go into. There's an awful lot of blood tests for this, because of course blood tests can specify to look for white blood cells, and we count the white blood cells, and we count the specific types of white blood cells. So a white blood cell count goes into all the different types of cells that we have. So that's basically the diagnostic tests, and then we have the others, the CTs and the MRIs, to actually look at our lymph vessels. The disorders are mentioned here. Lymphoma is a cancer. Anything with oma is usually a type of cancer. Cancer of the lymphocytes. There's two types, Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's. Both basically have abnormal B and T cells. But one of the abnormalities of the B cells is what distinguishes Hodgkin's from non-Hodgkin's. It's a specific shape that they have identified that's the difference between the two. But they have similar symptoms. Multiple myeloma is the plasma cells in bone marrow. Remember, the bone marrow releases those to start with, and if there's a cancer of that can be very devastating. Splenomegaly is, as the word says, spleno, spleen, and megaly, enlargement, so it's an enlarged spleen. Affects the circulating blood cells, traps them into the spleen where it shouldn't. It should only trap the old blood cells, but it traps the new ones as well, and therefore there's reduced numbers circulating in the body. And trapping the healthy blood cells can actually make a clog in the system, in the spleen, and can cause it to inflame and just become blocked and not function anymore. Other disorders, allergies, of course, it's a hypersensitivity to antigens. It's an overreaction. They overreact, and they cause things like inflammation, which gives us other symptoms. And if we have inflammation of certain, like air passages, like in asthma, we can actually die from that because we can't breathe, and we actually need to breathe. And anaphylactic shock is a type of allergy, of course. And that can close our airway, so again we can't breathe. So some allergies can be fatal, but basically it's an overreaction of the cells to antigens. Autoimmune disorders. Auto, remember, means self. So autoimmune disorders are based on molecular mimicry. Some of the molecules in certain antigens look the same as our self antigens. So the poster that's put up by the cells is unsure whether it's self or foreign. So it's a mistaken reaction. So our T helper cells are mistakenly reacting to something which is actually our self, and it thinks it's something that's foreign. And then there's immunodeficiency. If you look at the word deficiency, it's deficient. It's not working properly. So it's failing to react. So those are the things. It's overreacting, it's mistakenly reacting, or it's failing to react completely. So immunodeficiency disorders, the lymphocytes are not working properly, or there's inadequate production of antibodies. When it does its cloning, it's not producing enough of the antibodies. You can have this congenitally. This is a deficiency that's present at birth or in the womb. It is inherited. Congenital means inherited. Acquired immunodeficiency disorders we have developed. Acquired means developed. And one such acquired immunodeficiency disorder that we know quite a lot about now is the HIV virus. Now the HIV virus, remember I told you viruses invade the actual cell. They get inside the cell and start to replicate. Well, the HIV virus invades the T helper cells. And we know how important the T helper cells are, so it's very devastating. It doesn't allow the T helper cells to go around and recognize anything if it's destroying them. So those that are left only produce a few of the antibodies to it, and it can take a long, long time for the body to produce any antibodies to the HIV. Meanwhile, the HIV virus has already attacked and done some damage. Part of the HIV virus is AIDS, and AIDS is basically the latter stage of HIV. HIV virus has done so much damage to the T helper cells that AIDS is basically the T cell count of less than 200 cells per millimeter cubed. So once we get to that point, we really don't have much circulating in our body to help us fight off anything. And typically when we get to the AIDS part of HIV, the death is from opportunistic infections, such as they list in the book. Things like pneumonias and respiratory disorders can take a hold because there's nothing there to fend them off. There's nothing to defend us anymore. So usually death is from opportunistic infections, even the flu, things like that. Anyone who's immunocompromised, and you've heard that quite a lot, anyone who's immunocompromised needs to have the flu vaccine every year to try and stop them from getting the flu, which can kill them. So HIV and AIDS are one and the same. HIV is the actual virus, and AIDS is a symptom, a bunch of symptoms, which means our T cells are less than 200 cells per millimeter cubed. And then table 11.2 sort of puts these disorders together. And then the very last page, putting the pieces together, have a study of that and see how the lymphatic system relates to the body and how it relates to the other systems in the body. And then, of course, look at the chapter summary, do the practice questions in terms of studying, and any other A&P revealed type study aids that we have on Connect.